Well, good morning, everyone, and I know we're standing between you and lunch, so we will have a powerful but short panel for you. I grew up in Southern California, and I always like to come back down here, even though I live in Sacramento now. And I don't know if you all turned on the news this morning. Did anybody feel the earthquake? Welcome to Los Angeles. And then for those of you who were thinking that you were going to have a little beach time perhaps attached to this trip, did you see that two great white sharks are visible from Seal Beach this morning? For anyone who was thinking of taking up surfing, wait till tomorrow. Let's hope they go out to sea. The purpose of the panel this morning is to talk about business leadership. So I decided that I wanted to go look for a good definition of business leadership. And in doing a little research on that, I came across an article written in something called the Business News Daily. They found the best 30 quotes on business leadership, and I like these too. Leaders are people who know how to achieve goals and inspire people along the way. There's another quote from someone named Susan Asher, and I really like this one. A leader is someone who takes you where you will not go alone. The two gentlemen here this morning, I'm hoping, are going to offer us both inspiration and maybe hold our hand a little bit if we need coaching to get on the road. So I'll start with Dennis. I'm going to do a brief introduction. Dennis Arriola is the president and CEO of the Southern California Gas Company. Southern California Gas has 21 million customers, so they are the largest gas distribution company in the United States. And Dennis has quite an interesting background. He has been at various levels of increasing responsibility at Sempra and also spent some time in the solar industry at SunPower. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Jan, and it's a pleasure to be here, and we really appreciate being a sponsor of the conference today. And Gary, kudos to you and to the board, because I think that it's not only an important conference, but I think it's timely given some of the announcements that we heard yesterday and today. You know, from Southern California Gas's perspective, one of the things I'm really proud of is with the aggressive targets that have been laid out for our state from a greenhouse gas perspective, I'm glad to report that we've already met the 2020 goals for greenhouse gas, being at the 1990 levels in 2014. So I think we're doing the right things. We're working with our customers. We're listening. We're talking about how we can effectively use different forms of technology. And, and there's obviously more that we can do, and we're working on those things. I think one of the things, and it was encouraging to hear President Picker and some of the other comments earlier today, is that, if we're going to be successful, and I think we all want to be successful as we take on these aggressive goals, we really need to be open-minded to things that don't even exist today, to new technologies, to new processes, but also to make sure that we take advantage of the tools and technologies that are here today, that we don't have to wait for 15 and 20 years. And one of the things that I often hear at conferences like this is that there's a silver bullet, we can just electrify everything, and that's going to solve all our problems. And I think that we, given the innovation, the creativity that we have in our state with our students, and whether it's in high school at the UC system or the Cal State systems, or the people that we have in Silicon Valley and here in Silicon Beach, we've got to be open-minded and not close off, any doors, and make sure that all ideas are considered, because the solutions that we're going to need to hit our 2030 and 2050 targets may not even exist today. So I think it's we need to make sure that we're not short-minded and we're open to every type of solution, including the use of natural gas. One of the things that I worry about a lot is, and President Picker touched on this as well, is we've got to really be careful about the cost of all these programs. I mean, the reality is that in California, about 1/3 of all utility customers are on some form of low-income assistance to pay their bills. 1/3 of all of our customers throughout California. And so when we talk about these very aggressive goals, are they realistic? They've got to be. We've got to make sure that we hit those goals. But we also need to make sure that we're doing it in a prudent way, and that as I look at how we employ the different tools and technologies, again, I don't think there's one silver bullet. I think that It's a little bit of everything. It's making sure that we experiment. It's making sure that we look at it from a portfolio of solutions, because ultimately that's going to reduce the overall risk. It's going to increase the overall benefit and optimize the costs, and costs are definitely important. So what is SoCalGas doing in regards to continuing to address climate change? And I'm going to include in that air quality, because that's one thing that I think that we're missing. We're not including poor air quality enough in the discussion, but specifically, let's start with transportation. Transportation, I think, as most people know, contributes about 80% of the overall NOx in California and about 40% of greenhouse gases. So big issue there, but it's also a big opportunity. Specifically within transportation, there's the heavy-duty sector. And if you live anywhere near a port, a freeway, a road, whether it's in Northern California or in Southern California, you know that we've got some real challenges still from an air quality standpoint. And when we talk about the governor's goal of trying to reduce petroleum usage by 50% by 2030, there's a perfect opportunity with transportation, specifically heavy-duty transportation. So we're very involved in working with technology manufacturers on the engine side, working with trucking companies to understand what type of infrastructure is needed to make sure that they can take care of the chicken and the egg problem of, I'm not going to buy a truck until the fueling infrastructure is there, and I'm not going to build the fueling infrastructure until there's the demand there. So we're very supportive of two specific bills that are going through the legislature today. Assembly Bill 857, which is sponsored by Assemblymember Henry Perea, which looks at providing incentives to near zero and zero emission trucks and heavy-duty equipment, and that could also utilize natural gas. The second piece of legislation that addresses the chicken and the egg problem is Assembly Bill 1074, which is sponsored by Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, that really looks at the future of alternative fueling infrastructure. So if we're talking about more EVs for light duty, and if we're talking about more natural gas for heavy duty, let's make sure that as we put together the universal fueling infrastructure, that we think about fast charging electricity, that we think about hydrogen, that we think about natural gas, and not recreate the wheel down the road. So those are two things that we're doing. On an energy efficiency side, this is an area where I'm very proud of what we've been able to do with our customers. And over the last 22 years, through energy efficiency and conservation education and employing new technologies and tools, we've been able to save our customers over 505 million therms over the last 22 years. So what does that mean? Well, it's basically equivalent to taking off 526,000 cars off the road. So we're really proud of that, but there's more that we can do. We're looking at how we can employ fuel cells and microturbines and combined heat and power systems in homes, restaurants, and in commercial applications. So there's some great stuff going on there. From a renewable standpoint, we think that there's a lot of upside in continuing to utilize natural gas to complement the governor's aspiration of having 50% renewables. And you heard President Picker talk about the fact that there, at certain times we actually have too much solar or wind power. But one of the things that we're specifically focused on is if you look at where the majority of the methane releases are in our economy here, according to the ARB's, I think it was their 2012 inventory study, about 87% of all methane comes from the agricultural waste and the waste treatment facilities. So 87%. About 6% comes from oil and gas pipelines. So there's some work to be done there. But one of the things that we're doing is looking at how we could take advantage of the natural methane release that's coming from those four-legged things that we use for hamburgers, and basically take that and turn it into biomethane or renewable natural gas. So we're working with the ag industries and the water industries to take advantage of new technology, to pilot new technology, so that we can capture that methane and use it more cost-effectively and more environmentally responsible. The other thing that I'd say very quickly is, from a technology standpoint, and again it relates back to what do we do with excess solar and wind when we're not using it today that we don't have commercially feasible or economic battery storage? Well, we've just announced a couple weeks ago a new project called Power to Gas And this is a technology that's being utilized today in Germany and other parts of Europe, where basically you can take that excess power that otherwise you would either curtail or dump, and basically use it to through this technology, take water and separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, basically break it down. You can then use the hydrogen to either insert it into your pipeline and blend it with natural gas so you have even cleaner burning natural gas, or you could use the hydrogen for transportation or for other manufacturing processes. So essentially you have the potential down the road to turn the nation's pipeline system into the largest energy storage or battery system. So that's one of the things that we're really excited about and we're looking at. So the last thing before I stop is air quality. We need to include more on air quality in the discussion on climate change. Unfortunately, California's got a lot of great things going for it, but unfortunately, air quality is not one of our best things. And according to the American Lung Association's 2015 State of the Air report, California has 5 of the top worst ozone polluted regions or cities in the country. And 4 of them are in the Central Valley and here in Southern California. So we need to make sure that the discussion about climate change also includes air quality, because there's too many kids that have asthma, there's too many people that are impacted with lung issues, and when you look at the vast majority of the people that are impacted, it's children, it's the elderly, disproportionately, it is people of low income, people of color that live by the highways, by the freeways, and the ports. And so if we really want environmental equality, we need to make sure that those that don't have a loud voice in Sacramento and in San Francisco, those people that can't speak up for themselves, that we're making sure that dollars are being resourced into those areas to improve the air quality. And so SoCalGas is proud to be a champion for those people and working not just to reduce greenhouse gases, but to improve air quality as well.
Good. Thank you very much, Dennis. Dirk, I'm going to turn to you next. Dirk Forrister is the president and CEO of AIDA, the International Emissions Trading Association. And of course, he is one of our 2015 Climate Action champions, although he's not wearing his belt up here this morning, I see. He has a long and very distinguished career. He served in the White House, he served at DOE, and he was a legislative counsel in Congress before he moved on to manage one of the world's largest carbon funds. And I'm hoping he'll bring an international perspective to the discussion this morning and let him talk a little about AIDA's work.
So first of all, I'm humbled to be up here, and I'm really delighted to follow Dennis, because when I sort of cut my teeth in the climate world, it was working on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer. And I got to say, I always like the company guys better than the association guys, because the company guys were much more progressive typically, not all of them obviously, but they were able to speak from a position of, at least the ones that I trusted and believed the most were the ones that had done a lot. And you've just described a lot of terrific things that are action-oriented, that are practical, that are efficient, and that are delivering benefits. And way too often in my career in Washington, the association guys were the ones that would come in dragged down by sort of lowest common denominator association politics, and then I would talk to the members of those associations and say, why were, you say so much more progressive stuff than the association. They say, yeah, well, sometimes we're part of the association so that we can know in advance when they're going to do something stupid. So as an association guy now, I actually think of AIDA as a very different breed of association. It's about 15 years old now, and it's comprised of companies that want to be leaders in climate change, many of them because they're inheriting a legacy of high-emitting assets that they need to do something about, and they need practical solutions, energy efficient, or efficient solutions economically, and they need frameworks that enable them to do a lot with a little in some respects. So I should say, first of all, a bunch of my members are in this room, and I would forget some if I tried to mention them all, but PG&E and Chevron, Shell, BP, Statkraft, EDF, not the EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, but the other one, Electricité de France Trading, that's active here in this market. And a host of others on the service provider side, from banks and from exchanges, from law firms that write the contracts that trades are all built on. And what drew them all together to form AIDA, I think initially, was a belief that there needed to be a professional class of business people that made markets work in emissions, that sort of took the policy and actually made it work in practice. And I think it's become that over the last 15 years. And I should have also said, Gary, that CAR is one of our member companies as well, or member institutions, I should say, which is an important part of sort of the carbon value chain. And I think what's drawing them together right now is this interest in new markets that are popping up all over the place. So it's great to follow Undersecretary Lacey talking about things that are happening in Mexico to explore emissions trading, carbon pricing types of programs. Those will only succeed if the business community in Mexico embraces them, takes a positive attitude, and taps into some of the solutions that have been developed elsewhere. And that's something that I think an association like AIDA can offer. A lot of what we've been trying to do is bring the experiences from existing markets that have gone through growing pains and are trying to better themselves, but to bring those experiences, share them, and hopefully enable others to learn from those examples. We're at a pretty critical time internationally. We've got this conference coming up in Paris that's been talked about here in a couple of, in several very important sessions. And where it's all going is a level of activity that's far beyond anything Dennis described. It's 2 degrees of temperature protection means 80 to 95% reductions for OECD countries by 2050. So the systems that we're all working hard to kind of make work in their initial stages now are going to have to do this work for a long time and enable that energy efficient economy to develop, enable emission reductions to occur, and to bring linkages across systems so that we can really take advantages of the efficiencies that are out there globally. It's not an easy thing to work on. We at AIDA not only sort of work in Sacramento and helping as best we can to keep this system working well and improve it where possible, but we're also working at a UN level where it's a hell of a beast to work with, because you have perspectives there that are very anti-market. Some countries that want nothing at all to do with markets mentioned in the agreement. And then you've got others like Mexico that I'm delighted that the Mexican INDC is one of the 2 examples so far that says we could do this much on our own, but if we have access to international markets, international linkages, regional or bilateral linkages, we could do a lot more. And that's the spirit, I think, that needs to come out of Paris. I think that's going to be the magic of what makes Paris work, is if countries see an opportunity to collaborate, to bring linkages between their programs together so that business can actually achieve the goals most cost effectively and in a very credible way. That's the way you get to a system that can deliver 2 degrees of protection cost effectively. And we're a long way, I think, on the policy side internationally from winning that battle. There's a lot of work to be done between now and Paris on that my organization works on, along with a host of other business organizations. And as I think about that political process, which maybe isn't any different than the national process here in the US or in Sacramento, business can play a constructive role, or it can be a poison pill in the whole thing. And if my membership had wanted to be on the poison pill side, I never would have taken this job. I really like being on the positive solution side of things, because I do think that there is a very important place that we can play in the debate in bringing reasonable solutions forward, bringing the right attitude, the right atmosphere forward, and sort of that can-do business spirit. So the place I want to close, and I'm happy to hear any interaction with others on this, is I think one of the toughest things about the climate issue right now is we're seeing progress in very unexpected places. China working on a national emissions trading program. That's just phenomenal. South Korea launching a national emissions trading program this year. Places from Kazakhstan to Chile looking at carbon pricing programs. It's a really phenomenal development when I think back to when I was in Kyoto wearing a US government delegate badge, and the US and Canada and Australia and a few others liked this idea of markets, but everyone else was skeptical of it. Now the tables have been turned, and in some respects the delegation with the biggest albatross around its neck is the United States of America. Even with this great California story and a great story in the northeastern US and a power plant rule that's going to be a very bumpy road for us at EPA, dealing with that and trying to find market-based responses. But we still have a really big political problem in this country. And I think business is probably the key to solving that. Business needs to find a way to engage the political right in the US to find that pivot point where they can talk about this in a rational way. Because it's a shame right now that too many states, and Governor Ritter kind of alluded to this on day one here, too many states have progressive businesses that I think are ready to unlock solutions, just like Dennis described. But they've got governors that are politically aspirant that, you know the thing about every governor wants to be president, of course, right? So they're all thinking about, yeah, what nod might I get? And to me, we're not going to get this 2-degree solution if we have to do a workaround Washington, D.C. And I think that is a real challenge for all of us in the business community and frankly for environmental NGOs and state officials that are in the room, is how do we get that political calculus turned around? Because I think I said this at this conference last year, it's been a long time coming that you used to be able to get away in Washington with opposing climate action because it was climate action or nothing. There was no cost to a no vote. But as we're learning a lot more, including in this state, about the cost of adaptation, we're finding that that's actually a false choice, right? When you decide not to take climate action, you have just voted for adaptation. You've just decided that you're going to spend a lot of money on adaptation. And I don't think that's really penetrated the political right in this country, that it's irresponsible to take that approach, and that actually it's time to kind of grow up, be sober about it, and take this issue on the merits and to find a real pragmatic solution. I'm convinced that's going to involve markets at their core, and it's one of the wonderful things about having a market-based solution here in California to examine, one in the Northeast to examine, and the linkages across the border to Canada to examine in terms of the benefits of international cooperation. And that's something that I think we need to all give a lot of hard thought to. How can we be a part of that conversation and changing the political debate in this country? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Dirk. You know, one of the reasons that I told Gary this last night, one of the reasons I love coming to this conference is I became the general manager at SMUD in 1994. And sometimes I feel older than dirt. I feel like I've been making the same arguments for 20, 25 years, and it seems so slow and painful and one little tiny step at a time. And yet when I come here and we get educated on what's going on. By the way, I hate the term subnational, but I guess we're stuck with it. I was going to ask you if we could change that to something a little more positive. But you hear about what's going on. People are making progress. There's a lot to be built on. Look at what your organizations are doing. And so I'll just throw this out. Why is it so slow? What could we in the business community do to speed it up? Should we be using the Paris conference as a deadline by which we attempt to orchestrate some broader business initiatives to get the people that are actively engaged in leadership in this area to move forward? I can't help but think about what just happened on the gay marriage legislation. The business community stepped up and things changed, and they changed pretty rapidly in some of the states in this country. So I'll throw that one at both of you.
You know, I guess what I'd say there, Jan, is, and I agree completely with Dirk, I think business needs to step up. I think for too long, individual companies and associations have been more about pointing out the flaws in the solutions and why it won't work for us in a perfect way. And I think we've got to figure out how we get engaged, whether it's in Sacramento and Washington, and how we start holding our legislators and regulators more accountable. When we do planning, we think about it over a 5, 10, 20-year horizon. Political cycles don't last that long. And I think we need to change the construct of that. But the other thing that I'd say is, you know, how can we speed things along? I think part of it is by making sure that when we set directions of where we want to go, that we don't put obstacles in front of that. Let the markets decide. Let technology and innovation come. And you can see how quickly things change in Silicon Valley and how quickly things change in Silicon Beach here in Los Angeles. There's a lot of smart people out there. There's a lot of capital that wants to find solutions and create profit opportunities. And if you look at companies like Burlington Northern Santa Fe and Waste Management, they're talking more and more about how they can use alternative fuels to service their companies. And it's not just about being green from an environmental standpoint, it's also good from an economic standpoint. So we shouldn't, as a country, say that if you want to grow the economy and create wealth for your shareholders, which in many cases are pension funds and people in this audience, we shouldn't vilify that. I think we should rush to say, how can business help and make sure that we're engaged?
So agree with everything Dennis said, and I think one of the things that we need to give some hard thought to is that I think some of our recent failures, certainly in Washington, may have had more to do with the fact that the opposition was better organized than the proponent side. I'm really pleased about an effort that Tom Kerr, my friend Tom Kerr from the World Bank, was here yesterday talking about the World Bank's leading an effort globally to get businesses to step up and voice support for carbon pricing programs, like Secretary Lacey is trying to launch in Mexico, because those programs need support. They need a consistent voice of business support. And I think we need to bring that same set of actions to this country, frankly, in the whole complicated debate about the EPA rules of like, let's take a time out and figure out a way to do a market-based solution in this country within the regulatory confines that are there that enable U.S. CEOs that aren't in states like California to step out and offer the support that they can that really needs to be voiced. So I think we need to, I hope everybody, all the business leaders in this room take a look at this effort. AIDA's going to be part of it and trying to champion it amongst our membership and do more outreach in other countries around getting companies to step forward and say, yes, with the right program, we can do our part on climate change. We need markets. We need access to, in many parts of the world, it's going to be access to climate finance as well. But there's a business community, I think, that's ready. It's much different than when I was at the White House. I mean, I'm showing my age on how long I've been working on this, but the first thing I worked on climate change, you'll love this, the first thing I worked on was an amendment to the Clean Air Act, a one-sentence amendment. It might have been the last piece of mandatory climate legislation that passed. It was a one-sentence floor amendment that required power companies to report CO2 when they turned in their acid rain data. That was the last mandatory piece of legislation that passed. But at the time, I got 3 power companies, maybe 4, to step forward and support it. And I think they got vilified. 2 of them were from California, LADWP and SoCal Edison. They had both just seen the Big Green Initiative that I think was a 50% reduction, was that right? That was a ballot initiative, 50% reduction in carbon, so stabilization by 1990 kind of sounded good. So they were willing to support at least honestly reporting your emissions. The other was TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, because I was working for a Tennessee congressman, and they couldn't say no to a Tennessee congressman's amendment, I think that was the thing. And the third one was Northern States Power. that's now part of Excel. So we've come so far. I think the power sector in this country would gladly take a legislated solution for a national market, gladly take that, if the right political leadership could emerge in Washington. So I think our side needs to get better organized this time.
That's good. Gary, I think I'm up against the noon deadline. Did anybody out there have a question quick for the panel? Everybody's probably ready to eat lunch. All right, well, thank you all. Help me congratulate our panelists here. Thank you very much.